Hi everyone, welcome back to another Planetarium live stream. We're very excited for the program we're doing today. So we're going to be having a kind of night sky tour / constellation story time, where we're going to show you what you can find up in the sky tonight, since the weather is getting kind of warmer on some days, so it can be a good time to go out and look before the mosquitoes get here. And give you a sense of what's up, some of the fun stories behind them, and then at the end we're also going to give you some apps and websites and things that can help you navigate the sky on your own whenever you can go out and take a look. So as always, if you have any questions throughout the stream, make sure you put them in the comments, or it might be over on the side. I'm not 100% sure if it's down or on the side, but put them in the comments, and Eli is going to be watching that and can let us know what questions you have. Just remember again that there is a bit of a lag between when we see them and you hear us answer, so give it a few minutes, and if we don't get to everything right away, we will take some time at the end to answer any questions you have. I know I've done this a few times, but I guess for anyone new, we can still do some introductions. I'm Jessica. I am the director of the Planetarium. Yes, I have an awesome job. With me today, we have Lindsay and Eli, and I'll let them introduce themselves. If Lindsay, you want to start?
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm a physics graduate student at UMD.
And I'm Eli. I am a physics undergraduate student at UMD.
And he's going to be just the voice in the sky for today.
Yeah, the device I'm on doesn't have a camera, so sorry about that.
All right, so I'm going to get the program up and running. And so just give me 1 second to get that going, and we will start. So the program that we are using today is called Stellarium. It's actually a free software that kind of mimics a planetarium, where you can set it to any date, time, and location that you want, and it will show you what's up in the sky. And so right now we have it up. This is for Duluth right now. And of course, the generated kind of field is just computer generated. This isn't actually somewhere in Duluth, but it gives you a sense for what's there. Of course, since it's daytime, we do have the sun up in the sky. But we want to look in the nighttime, so I am going to speed time up. And we will see the sun move across the sky and start to set in the west. We, of course, know that the sun always rises up in the east and sets in the west because the Earth is spinning. The Earth is rotating. It rotates from east to west. And so everything appears, no, it rotates from west to east. I got that backwards. So everything appears to rise in the east and set in the west. The sun, the moon, the stars, everything. So if I stop just at sunset, we can see up in the west is the planet Venus. It is very bright. If you are out around sunset looking west, it will be the first point of light that you see in the sky, because it's super, super bright and you can see it before any of the stars come out. So let's keep fast forwarding until the sun sets. And we will turn, there we go, over to the north and take a look first at some constellations that we can find in the north. And I'm going to let Eli take it over.
Okay, so we do have a bit of a lag between what we can see on the stream and what we're talking about right now. So I am going to have to ask a couple times to make sure that I have the right frame, but we are good with the dippers right now, Jessica?
Yes, we are.
Okay, cool. So one of the first constellations, I think personally and pretty widespread that we try to look for in the night sky is the Big Dipper. And you may know, you may not know, the Big Dipper is actually not a constellation itself. It's what we call an asterism. And an asterism, in this case, is a kind of smaller, easier to recognize group of stars than the entire constellation. The entire constellation is actually called Ursa Major, or the Big Bear. And I don't know if you could outline that, Jessica, but
Yep.
the Big Bear, it has the Dipper, as we know it, the handle is the tail, and then the I guess the actual Dipper part is kind of the body, the rear side of the body. And then there's a head and some legs too, but it's a little bit harder to see. So we use the Big Dipper as kind of a cornerstone up here. But if we have a Big Dipper and a Big Bear, we're also going to need a Little Dipper and a Little Bear. And the best way to do that is you take the two farthest stars of the Big Dipper, kind of the end of the Dipper part, you draw a line connecting them, and then you follow it. Well, in this case, it would be downwards. But you know, kind of draw a line connecting them, and this will point you directly to the North Star. Now, the North Star is not the brightest star in the sky. That's a misconception, but it is a really, really important star, namely because it, for our intents and purposes, doesn't move. The North Star is a very valuable navigational tool because it's kind of the one thing that stays right where it is. And
And I can fast forward just a little bit so that they can see that.
okay, cool.
So I'm going to speed
Yeah,
up
so
time just a second so that you can see all the stars moving except for Polaris. And we may have to back up a little bit when we head over to the east, but it's fine. All right, back to you, Eli.
yeah. So, and what it means to be a North Star is, from our perspective, that star, well, actually, not just from our perspective, it is aligned directly with the Earth's axis of rotation. So the Earth rotates on this axis, and since it is lined up with that star, it appears to us that that star doesn't move. Over a much, much, much longer period of time, on the order of 24,000 years, it does change. But you know, in our day-to-day life, we're not really going to see that. The North Star does kind of make a circle in the sky. So 12,000 years from now, it will be in a different spot. But for us right now, we're lucky enough to have it lined up with a pretty visible star. And it's just kind of a cool little feature that we have. So once you've found the North Star, you have found the end of the tail of Ursa Minor, or the Little Bear. The tail stars, well, actually, most of the stars in Ursa Minor are pretty dim, but you can kind of make it out just barely in the night sky here in Duluth. You can't make out all of the stars, but the general shape is there. And so we have this tail and then this small rectangular body. And I like to make the joke that it looks to me much more like a squirrel than it does like a bear, just because of the proportions of the body. But I'm not going to argue with the Greeks on this one. But I am going to tell a modified version of their star story for it. So once upon a time, Zeus, the king of the gods, lived on the top of Mount Olympus with his wife Hera. But he wasn't the most responsible, and sometimes he liked to leave Mount Olympus and go down to the regular overworld without doing his chores, and kind of leaving everybody in Mount Olympus on the dust. So one time he went down and he made a friend. Her name was Callisto, and they were hanging out down there. And Callisto had a son, and they were all just kind of buddy buddy down there. But Hera, Zeus's wife, realized that Zeus hadn't done his chores and that he was doing something irresponsible by going down and wasting his time down there. So she went down there and out of anger, turned Callisto, Zeus's friend, into a bear so that Zeus would have to go back up to Mount Olympus. So now we have Hera in the form of a bear, and this her kid is kind of without a mother, and he has to go off. And time goes by, and Zeus doesn't get to hang out with them, obviously. But then one day, later in or further in the future, the son, whose name was Arcus, had grown up and he was living in a village, and he saw that Arcus, he saw from the top of Mount Olympus, Zeus did, that Arcus was hunting, and he was coming across a bear in the forest. Now, Zeus recognized that this bear was Callisto, who had been turned into a bear by Hera some time ago, and he didn't want, you know, Arcus to accidentally hunt his mother, obviously. So what he did is he turned Arcus into a baby bear, and to protect them from further hunting, he grabbed their tails and spun them around really fast and threw them into the night sky so they could always be together and they could always be safe from hunters. So that's why we have the big bear and the little bear, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. So I'm going to take a sip of coffee really quick because my throat is super dry. And now we will talk about a constellation that is right in between these two, actually, or starts right in between them at least. We're going to talk about Draco the Dragon, which is this big dragon in the nighttime sky. So Draco's tail starts right in between the two bears, and then it kind of snakes up around Ursa Minor and then curves around, and then its head is kind of this triangle up here, and its mouth is this bright star that's breathing fire onto Vega. So we have a really cool big dragon in the nighttime sky there. Not a big story behind that one, but I think one of my favorite constellations nonetheless. Yeah, there are a bunch of cool animals and mythological creatures up there. So now, kind of this last jump that we're going to make is, again, we're going to take this star hop that we took earlier to find the Little Dipper, the two stars at the end of the Big Dipper, and then follow that up to the North Star. But rather than stopping at the North Star this time, we are going to follow the line that it created further until we reach a constellation called Cassiopeia or Cassiopeia. Now, depending on the time of year, Cassiopeia looks like an E, an M, a W, but the shape of it is a queen. So the queen, and it's, again, this is a little hard because I'm not seeing the exact screen that's going on right now, but the queen is kind of sitting, and we are getting a like a profile view of her. And so her face is looking kind of off to the side. And so we have the head, the body, kind of the upper legs sitting in her throne, the lower legs going down from there, and then she has really big feet that stretch out. And Cassiopeia is a queen in the nighttime sky. And if we have a queen, we also have a king. This king is named Cepheus. And this is another one of my favorite constellations, actually, just because the shape is very satisfying to me. So Cepheus, the head of Cepheus, imagine, forms the kind of top of a triangle. And then if we go down from this head of Cepheus, we can find kind of a square. So we have this square, and then we have a big triangle on top of it. And the reason I love this one so much is because it looks like a kind of an elementary school drawing of a house, or also a house that I would totally draw because I'm not good at drawing stuff. And that is just another one of my favorite constellation shapes. But Cassiopeia and Cepheus are in the nighttime sky because they were extremely vain and they weren't nice people. And as a punishment for that, the gods put them in the nighttime sky in such a way that they can't look at each other. If you remember, Cassiopeia is kind of looking off to the side, and Cepheus is looking exactly at us. And so they can never look at each other ever again. And they were put in the sky in that organization as a punishment for being vain and kind of not good people.
Yeah, they were pretty mean.
Mm-hmm.
So just a quick note on the north before we head over to the west. I don't know if you noticed that when we went to go look at the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, we had to look kind of high up in the sky because this time of year, the Big Dipper is pretty high overhead. The Little Dipper sits a little bit lower in the sky below it. And then our queen and king sit close to the horizon, all in the north. So if you go out and face north and look really high up, you can find the Big Bear and the Big Dipper. And then if we keep going, if you start looking down towards the horizon, you can then find the Little Bear and our king and queen. All right, so we're going to head over to the west now. And because I did speed up time to show you the motion of the sky, we have gotten a little bit later into the night than I initially was planning. So I'm going to use some of our planetarium magic here and roll back the time just a little bit so that we are looking at right around 9 o'clock. So over in the west, around 9 o'clock, we can still see Venus nice and bright up in the sky, but we still have a large group and bright group of constellations visible, known as the winter hexagon. And so we're going to show you those. The first, let me turn these lines off real quick. The first of which is probably the most famous of the winter hexagon, and that is the constellation of Orion the Hunter. You can usually find him with his 3 belt stars in a row, and then you have kind of 4 more stars that form this kind of like box around his belt. And so up here we have his shoulders, and then his legs come down this way. We have a sword hanging off the belt. And then there's a couple of different ways you can picture him. He's either holding a bow and has some arrows coming out, or this is a shield and he's holding a club. So that is our hunter Orion. Orion has some really interesting things in him. You can see that it has one bright red star here called Betelgeuse. And it is actually red in color. If you go out at night and you look at it, you will see it looks red. And that's because it's what we call a red supergiant. It is a star that's at the end of its life that is going to go supernova. It's going to explode. But before anyone gets worried, it is not going to hurt us. We're far enough away that we're not going to be harmed when it explodes. But we are close enough that it's going to be very, very bright. So bright that we could even see this in the daytime sky. Now, we don't know when exactly that's going to happen. Astronomers say soon, but soon in astronomy could be tomorrow, could be 1,000 years from now, so we really don't know for sure. And then in the belt of Orion here, I'm going to zoom in so that you can see, there is this little fuzzy cloud that you can see if you have a kind of good pair of binoculars or a small telescope and you point it here. This fuzzy little cloud is known as the Orion Nebula. And so a nebula is just a gas cloud in space. This particular gas cloud is a stellar nursery. It is a gas cloud where stars are being born, and it's very pretty, as you can see. So this is one of my favorite objects to look at through a telescope. All right, so Orion is accompanied by his 2 faithful companions. He has 2 hunting dogs with him. The first one we can find by taking Orion's belt, connecting it in a line, and following that line over to the super bright star named Sirius. So this is actually the brightest star in the nighttime sky, and it is the brightest star in the constellation of Canis Major, the big dog. And so we have kind of the dog's head, his body, and then some legs coming down. Because Sirius is in the big dog constellation, it's often nicknamed the dog star. And there are a couple of things that were named after this in particular. So if anyone is a fan of Harry Potter, you may know the character Sirius Black, and you may know that his character is able to turn into a dog. And that's why J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, got her inspiration, a lot of her inspiration from things in the nighttime sky. Another thing is the Sirius XM radio station that has a logo of a dog for the same reason. All right, so Orion has a second hunting dog. So if we jump from Sirius, oops, right here, up to this next bright star named Procyon, we can see the second hunting dog. And this is an interesting choice. It is these two stars right here. For some reason, Orion decided to have a wiener dog as a hunting dog. We're not 100% sure why, but that's what he chose. So there is Orion and his two hunting dogs there. So those make up 3 of the 6 constellations in the winter hexagon. To find the next one, which is the constellation that Orion and his hunting dogs are currently chasing after, we're going to go back to Orion's belt. And instead of following it to the left to the star Sirius, we're going to follow it to the right to this bright red star named Aldebaran. And then Aldebaran, we can see, is at this kind of V shape of stars. So this V shape is the head of Taurus the bull. And so Aldebaran is one of his red eyes. Here's his kind of snout. Horns go up this way, and then his body stretches out over here. Oops. And so there is the horns and face of Taurus the bull. Now, inside of Taurus is another really interesting object. We can see right inside the body of Taurus sits what looks kind of like a mini dipper. It's this little cluster of stars, and I'm going to zoom in so that we can see it. This little cluster, or little mini dipper, is known as the Pleiades star cluster. So it is a kind of group of stars. There are a couple hundred stars in there, but the brightest stars, there are about 6 to 7 that we can typically see without a telescope. And so it's often nicknamed the Seven Sisters because of those 7 bright stars that we can see. And so that is the Pleiades star cluster. If you drive a Subaru car, this may look a little familiar because the Japanese name for this cluster is Subaru, and the company's logo is the star cluster. So that's another little fun fact. But there are also some other stories about this star cluster. There are a lot of different stories because a lot of different cultures, almost all cultures, when they looked up at the sky, they saw patterns and they made stories about them. And so I know Lindsay has one about the Pleiades that we love, and so I'm going to let her tell this one.
So this is from the Inuit Native American tribe that's kind of in northern Canada and Alaska. And this is about Nanook the polar bear. So one day, Nanook the polar bear, some wolves started to chase him. And of course, he started to run away from them to try to get away from them. And he kept running and running and running and trying to get away from them, but they kept keeping up with him. And so he was trying to just keep running and hoping that they would tire out eventually, but they weren't tiring out. And so he was trying to figure out how he could get rid of these wolves once and for all. And so he decided to run towards the edge of the earth, run off the edge of the earth, because, you know, he didn't think that they would be stupid enough to follow him off the edge of the earth, but they were. And so Nanook the polar bear and all of the wolves landed in the night sky and are making up the stars in the Pleiades.
Yeah. All right, so very quickly, I'm going to finish up the winter hexagon because there are 2 more constellations in it. If we go up from Taurus the Bull, we can see this kind of squished pentagon in the sky. This is, oops, here we go. Sorry, where my mouse is on my screen and where it's showing up on the stream are slightly different, and I have to keep remembering that. So this squished pentagon is known as Auriga the Charioteer. So he's driving a chariot or a wagon, and so we have kind of a wagon wheel here, a wagon wheel here, and then his head kind of poking out of the basket of the wagon. And then jumping over from Auriga, we have our last of the winter hexagon, which is the Gemini twins. And so we have Castor and Pollux are the 2 bright stars in Gemini. They're often known as the twin stars. So Castor here has a long body and short little legs. And Pollux has a short body and long legs, and they're kind of arm in arm. There are a lot of stories about the Gemini twins. One of our personal favorites says that the Gemini twins are often known for being kind of troublemakers, very mischievous. And so this story says that they have crashed a wedding and kidnapped the bride. And so instead of being arm in arm here, this is actually the bride that they're running away with, because they like to pull pranks like that. All right. And so that is our winter hexagon with Orion, the big dog, our little wiener dog, the Gemini twins, Auriga, and Taurus. And so they are starting to get pretty low in the sky since we're, out of winter, but they will still be up just after sunset for a little bit longer. So those are some good things to go and look at right after sunset. All right, so we're going to now move over to the south, because up in the south we have some of our spring constellations. And the most famous of which, that's up right now, is Leo the Lion. And so the trick that people often say to find Leo is to look for the backwards question mark. The problem is, with lots of stars in the sky, you can often find lots of different backwards question marks. And so the trick is to find the right one. And to do that, we're going to look high up in the sky and look for, there we go. Look for our Big Dipper again. And we are going to take the cup of the Big Dipper and use that to form an arrow. And that arrow is going to point us to the correct backwards question mark. And so this is Leo the Lion. We have his head. This bright star is Regulus, and it's the heart of the lion. And then his body stretches out this way. And so that is Leo the Lion right there. Now, in between Leo and our Gemini twins is another constellation. This one can be a bit harder to find because it is pretty faint. But in between Leo and the Gemini twins, you can find this very faint kind of Y shape. Or maybe it looks like a flux capacitor for any Back to the Future fans. This is Cancer the crab. And so we have his little body, oops, and then his little legs and pincers coming off from that. All right, now we do have a story with Leo and Cancer the crab, but we need another character to tell that. So we're going to tell it in just a few minutes when we find our last character. So that's up in the south. Now if we move a little bit more east, or move over to the east, we can find the last of the few constellations that we want to tell you about today. So once again, we're going to look high up in the sky to find the Big Dipper. And this time, we're going to use the handle of the Big Dipper to help us find our next star and constellation. So if we follow the curve of the handle, we will arc to this bright star named Arcturus. And so it's an easy way to remember to find it. We use the handle of the Big Dipper to arc to Arcturus. And Arcturus is a pretty bright star in the sky, so it's easy to find. And Lindsay has another fabulous story to tell us this time about Arcturus.
This one is from the Lumi Native American tribe. So this story starts with Coyote. And in a lot of Native American stories, Coyote is kind of a troublemaker. Well, he's out one day walking around and he happens to spot some very pretty ladies and he decides he wants to impress them. So to impress the pretty ladies, he decides to take out his eyeballs and start to juggle them. So he's juggling his eyeballs and throwing them higher and higher into the sky to try to be more and more impressive. And he ends up throwing one of his eyeballs so high into the sky that it sticks there. And now it's that star Arcturus.
I love that story. So Arcturus is in the Greek constellation of Bootes, and it's this kind of kite-looking constellation. Arcturus is kind of at the tip of where the tail of the kite would come out. Now this is supposed to be a guy, a bear herder, and this is a case where it's a good example of you don't always see the thing that the constellation's supposed to be. Like I was saying, it looks more like a kite than a guy. I also like to think it looks like a cone of ice cream. So like here's the cone and then the scoop of ice cream right here. So yeah, there are a lot of constellations that don't necessarily look like what they're named after, and this is a good example of that. So we're going to do a little bit more star hopping. So we have used the handle of the Big Dipper to arc to Arcturus. And then from Arcturus, we're now going to spike to this bright star named Spica. And so again, we arc to Arcturus, and then we spike to Spica. And Spica is in the constellation of Virgo the Maiden. And so we kind of think of Spica as one of her hands, and it's kind of sitting on her hip. She's kind of got her hand on her hip here. So here's her body. Her other hand is up. It's kind of like she's waving at us, and then her legs come down from here. She's a pretty big constellation up in the sky. And Virgo has an interesting story. So Virgo's name is Persephone, and she was known as being a very beautiful woman. So beautiful that when people saw her, they immediately fell in love with her. And so she's out picking flowers one day, and Hades, who is the god of the underworld, comes across her, sees her, instantly falls in love with her, decides that he wants to marry her, but instead of asking, he just kidnaps her and takes her down to the underworld with him. Well, her mother, who is a goddess named Demeter, realizes that her daughter is missing and decides to go searching for her and finally finds her down in the underworld with Hades. And Demeter, Persephone's mother, gets into a huge argument with Hades, trying to get her daughter back. Well, in the meantime, Persephone becomes very hungry and decides to eat a pomegranate. And this may not seem super significant to us, but to the Greeks who came up with the story, where you eat is considered your home. And since Persephone ate a pomegranate down in the underworld, that was now her home. And so it was a lot more difficult for Demeter to make Hades let her go and let her leave the underworld. Well, after a lot of arguing, they came to an agreement that Persephone would spend 6 months with her mother and 6 months with Hades in the underworld. And so when Persephone is with her mother, that's when we see her up in the sky. Now, her mother is the goddess of kind of the harvest and farming and also controls the weather. And so she's very happy when Persephone is with her. And so that's why we have very good weather when she's up in the sky with her mother. But then for the other 6 months of the year, when Persephone is down in the underworld with Hades, Demeter is very sad, and that's when we have our bad weather. And so this is how the Greeks explained the seasons throughout the year. And I think that's always just a really fun kind of story and showing how earlier cultures came up with explanations for things before we figured out what really causes them. All right. So the last things over here in the east that we want to show you, if we hop back over to Arcturus, next to the constellation of Boötes, we can see this backward C in the sky. This is a crown known as Corona Borealis. And this crown is going to help us find Hercules. And so Hercules can be a little bit tricky to find sometimes, but what you want to do is turn the crown into a spoon. And so this would be kind of like the bowl, I guess, of the spoon. And then we want to add in these stars here to make a handle for our spoon. Well, the reason we do that is because these stars that we've used to make the handle are actually the belt stars of Hercules. And so here is his body. His legs come up this way, and then his arms are still a little bit underneath the horizon. He's just starting to come up in the sky. And if you remember us finding Draco, here's Draco's head. He's kind of breathing fire all over Hercules. We like to say that Hercules isn't exactly flailing. He's doing an awesome ninja roll to avoid the fire breath of Draco the dragon. That's something that we had a field trip in the planetarium last year, and the students came up with that explanation, and I love it, so we use it now. But Hercules has a fun story, and this is the one that's also going to involve Leo and Cancer that we saw just a few minutes ago. So for our very last constellation story, I'm going to turn it back over to Lindsay.
Right, so Hercules, he was half god, half human, and he was very, very strong, but he didn't know how to control his own strength. And so he accidentally caused a lot of accidents because of his strength, and people didn't like him. And so he went to this king to try to see if he could get people to like him again. And so the king gave him 12 things to do to get people to like him again. So one of the things that he had to do on the list was defeat the Hydra. And the Hydra is kind of like a dragon, but it has 3 heads and no wings. But when you cut off one head, 3 more grow in its place. So it's really difficult to defeat the Hydra. Now, Hera, Zeus's wife, wanted Hercules to lose this particular battle, and so she sent Cancer the crab to go and nip at Hercules' heels to try to distract him and get him eaten. Well, poor Cancer the crab got stepped on. And so Hera felt bad for him and put him up in the sky. And then Hercules was able to defeat the Hydra. Another thing that Hercules had to do to get people to like him again was to defeat the Nemean lion. So Leo the lion, when it was living, it was known as the Nemean lion, and it had magical skin. You could not pierce the skin with an arrow or anything like that, a sword. And so it was kind of immortal, undefeatable. Well, Hercules, since he was so strong, he was able to strangle it to kill it. And afterward, he took the skin of the Nemean lion to wear as a robe. Well, since everybody considered the Nemean lion to be immortal, the fact that Hercules was able to defeat this immortal thing made people even more afraid of him than they were to begin with. So this whole plan of Hercules is to get people to like him again didn't really work out for him.
Yeah. And so that covers most of the sky that we can see just after sunset. Again, this was around 9 p.m. There are, of course, lots of other constellations, but they tend to be dimmer and harder to find. And so we have pointed out for you some of the easiest of the constellations that you can go out and find yourself. So with that, we want to end with, oops, did not mean to show my notes there, end with a couple of different things that you can use to help you go out and navigate the sky yourself. So in the description for the video, I have linked to the Stellarium website, which is that program that we just used to do this night sky show for you. It is free to download, and so you can get that for yourself and play around with it and use that to kind of learn the sky. Another thing that you can do that we have linked in the description is print off a sky map. And if any of you have been to the planetarium, you know that we like to distribute sky maps out to you guys, have them available for you. And this is actually where we get them from, is this website. And so they're free. They put them out every month. And there is a lot of great description on the map of different things you can see, both with your eye, with binoculars or a telescope. It has some dates for like when you're going to have a full moon and things like that. The way you use this is the very center of the circle map is directly overhead. And then the outside of the circle is the horizon. So we can see over here in the north, near the horizon, is that W of Cassiopeia, like we talked about. And high up overhead is the Big Dipper, like we talked about. And so that is how you can use this to help you navigate. And so it has along what direction to look. And then again, towards the edge of the circle will be close to the horizon. And the closer to the center you get, the higher overhead it's going to be. The other option, and I'm going to switch back to our faces so that we can talk to you guys. A couple of other things that I have put in the description are some phone apps that you can use. These are free to download, and they use your GPS location to basically, you hold up your phone to wherever you want to look, and it will display for you what you're seeing in the sky. So it'll give you the names of the constellations, planets, stars, any of that fun stuff. And so you can use this and you just hold it up and look around, and it will give you real-time kind of what you're looking at, which is really awesome. So those are some of our resources to help you navigate the sky and find a lot of these fun things that we've showed you today. So Eli, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we got two from Kathy Roller Harrington.
Hi,
hey
Mom.
guys, will the constellations appear in the same place all over the U.S., asking from South Carolina?
That is a good question. No, they will not. The sky will look different for people at different latitudes. So for you guys in South Carolina, everything in the north is going to be a little bit lower in the sky, because you're lower down at lower latitude. But that's one of the benefits to using something like Stellarium for anyone who's not near Duluth or in a similar latitude as Duluth, is you can set your location and use that to kind of see the slight differences in where things are.
Okay. And then from Amy Coretta, how many moons do we have?
So we have, of course, the one big moon that we know of. And then we have recently found a mini moon that I think was supposed to leave this month. So at the moment, possibly two, but our mini moon isn't sticking around forever. It's going to be flying off away soon, sometime this month, I believe, if it hasn't already. And there could be more mini moons that we just haven't seen, because the problem is the smaller the object is, the harder it is for us to see it. So yeah. Any other questions?
Nope, that's it.
All right, well, we'll give you a couple of minutes to get in any of your last minute questions while we end with telling you our schedule for the upcoming week. So on Saturday, Lindsay and Eli will be doing a live stream on the scale and wonders of the universe, looking at kind of how big the universe is, and some of the really cool things that you can find in it. And then next week, on Wednesday, we're going to do a tour of the solar system and also give you some fun activities that you could do at home, to try and learn about kind of the distance between the planets and really kind of visualize the distance between the planets, or use Play-Doh to get a sense of how big the planets are compared to each other. And then Saturday next week, what did we decide? Oh, Eli, yes. Eli and Lindsay have also been working on a new show for us at the Planetarium all about the science and astronomy in the Star Wars movies. And so if you visited us in the past, you may know that we used to have a show about that. That we had pulled recently because we wanted to update it because there's a lot of new stuff going on. And so Lindsay and Eli and a couple of the other of our student staff have been working on that. And so Eli is going to, and I'm assuming anyone else who wants to help you, is going to share a little bit of that, some of the new stuff we've been working on for our new Star Wars show. So that's going to be exciting. So yeah.
So we got one more question from Jenny Conrad. Why, when the moon or sun is on the horizon, does it get bigger? And by the way, we are elementary students watching from home.
Awesome. Well, hi. So it doesn't actually get bigger. It's an optical illusion. What happens when the moon, for example, is low in the sky, you're seeing it compared to things like trees and buildings, things that you know are really, really big. And so your brain automatically thinks, oh, this has to be big because it's the same size as buildings and trees that I'm seeing. But then when it gets higher in the sky, you don't have those trees and buildings to compare it to anymore. It's kind of by itself. And so your brain loses that kind of connection and doesn't think of it as being as big. That kind of makes sense. And so it is the same size, but it's just an optical illusion because you can compare it to things you know the size of when it's close to the horizon, and you don't have that when it gets high. And that's something you can go out and test yourself. If you want to go out and look at the moon when it's low in the sky, you can kind of hold let me find my camera, there we go, hold your thumb out at arm's length and see how big the moon is compared to your thumb. And then a couple hours later, when the moon has gotten higher, you can go out and do the same thing. And you should notice, and you should find that they are the same size. But that is a really good question.
All right, nothing else.
All right. Well, I guess with that, I also know that Lindsay and Eli have to head to class. So thank you everyone for joining us. As usual, these will be posted up on our YouTube page if you'd like to go and watch them again or at a later time. And thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. So bye everyone.